Elvis Presley was a legend, beloved by millions. But the circumstances surrounding his death have been shrouded in mystery. Tonight, for the first time, dramatic new evidence that proves that Elvis Presley was more than the king of rock and roll. Much more. What secret business was Elvis Presley conducting with two different American presidents? Why was Elvis Presley's middle name misspelled on his own grave? Who was this man photographed at Elvis's house 4 months after Elvis allegedly passed away?
I started traveling.
Who was this mysterious phone caller, captured in a conversation recorded in 1981? Why is Elvis Presley's name found on over 1,400 pages of FBI documents? And why are some of these documents still classified? All this and much more tonight.
I'll borrow my mother's earrings, her scarf, but my mother's tampons. No way! I found new Ultimates cardboard applicator tampons from Playtex. Great protection, plus a curved cardboard applicator. Ultimates. It's not your mother's tampon.
You there to love me, both day and night. Never comes up fussy, you just treat me right. Never run the street, leave me alone. She knows the woman place right back there in the home. Got a woman way across town. She's good to me. Oh yeah.
And I'll be right by your side. My love's too strong to hide. When I come to die, and when I come to die, give me Jesus, give me Jesus, give me Jesus. You can have the soul, give me Jesus.
All right. Thank you very much. What's up, sobers? Once someone is accepted into the Witness Protection Program, which is also referred to as WITSEC, typically the person goes into it with their entire family. That way there's no hiding or any sort of, lying that has to go on. And obviously then they can go and live with their family. They don't have to separate themselves for life. But there's only a very few select people that actually know what's going on. Everybody else is kind of left in the dark and don't really know what happened to this person. Now, at first glance, this sounds like we're headed into tinfoil hat territory, but the deeper that we dig, the more convincing it is. And with a lot of the stories on this channel, we find that there's theories that a lot of the people we talk about didn't actually die. They just faked their own death. They're off sitting on a beach somewhere, hanging out with Tupac. But one of the very first instances of someone who was said to have faked their own death would be that of the late great king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Since its inception in 1971, the Witness Protection Program has actually housed and protected 19,000 victims with a 0% death rate on any of these witnesses. With the rise of organized crime really starting in the 1950s, really taking off during the 60s, by 1971, they really felt like there needed to be some sort of program to protect these very important witnesses who were in great danger because of the people they were testifying against or the people that they had turned on. Remember, snitches get stitches. They're issued new IDs, they're given a living stipend, they get relocated into some sort of federal housing that is constantly under surveillance and is protected by armed security guards. And up until 1990, they used to cover plastic surgery to help you look the part. The whole process seems pretty intense, but for somebody who's a really high-profile witness in a case that could get blown with the loss of that witness, then it definitely makes sense. And most of the time, there's actual backstories given to each one of these characters. They're given new names, they're given their own backstory, new birthdays, new everything. You'd think that maybe they would just be a ghost online, but because they have an official backstory, they have an official created persona, that's not always the case. And recent polls have shown that nearly 8% of the American population believes that Elvis Presley is still alive today. So let's see if we can't bump that number up to an even 10%.
Let's go.
met you, baby, you was drinking raw alcohol. But now and off you drink, all you want is a bottle of alcohol. Well, the Hattie call boogie, the Hattie call boogie, the Hattie call boogie makes you boogie woogie all the time.
Since I put my name on the Hattie call list, I'm feeling fine, I'm very much alive.
All right, thank you very much. Welcome back to Sobering Stories with me, DJ Presley. If this is your first time in the sober sector, well then welcome. Thank you so much for clicking on that thumbnail. And go ahead and just strap in, because we got ourselves another wild ride as per usual. If you're a returning subscriber, you already know the deal. Keep your hands, legs, everything else inside of the vehicle at all times. And sub-sobers. Now this week we don't necessarily have a sponsor, but I did want to shout somebody out that was hugely instrumental in putting this video together. And that would be my beautiful, caring, kind, sweet, curious, adorable, perfect fiance who sat around and looked up Elvis stuff with me for the last week. She helped me find stuff that I wasn't able to find on my own. She also helped me separate what was fact versus fiction. And honestly, I could have used an entire team to go down this rabbit hole. It was that deep. So I really appreciate her help this week. I just wanted to tell her that I love her and tell her thank you. So thank you, Kim. Now, the last couple of weeks, we've taken kind of a dark detour. Charlie Kirk and 9/11. And admittedly, they didn't really have much to do with addiction or sobriety, maybe addiction to power and money, I don't know. And those are amazing videos. I still highly recommend them, and for whatever reason, they're not doing so great. Maybe I'm shadow banned again, I don't know. I wanted to reel things back in a little bit and talk about something a little bit lighter, something that's equally as interesting, and something that gets us refocused on the goal here, which is promoting sobriety through real-life stories of tragedy, addiction, and ultimately trying to figure out what's the truth behind these stories. You'd be really hard-pressed to find somebody nearly 50 years after his death that's never heard of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. But for the last 48 years, there has been so much speculation as to what actually happened with Elvis. Maybe it's because he's such a monumental figure that it's hard for people to digest that he's gone. Or maybe there's actual evidence out there showing that Elvis is still alive. And in most of my stories, like I said, there is typically the theory that the person didn't even pass away at all. They actually just faked their own death so that they could escape some sort of situation. Typically, it's the stresses of fame. But I can honestly say that none of the other stories I've covered have got me so convinced as this one does. Elvis ARON Presley was born on January 8th, 1935 in East Tupelo, Mississippi. He was born to father Vernon Presley and mother Gladys Smith. His dad was a sharecropper. I actually don't know what that is. And his mom was a seamstress who supposedly had the voice of an angel. Elvis was actually born 35 minutes after his twin brother, Jesse Garon Presley. But unfortunately, Jesse was stillborn. He didn't make it. Because Vernon and Gladys were not doing very well financially, they couldn't really afford a proper burial site, so they ended up burying Jesse in an unmarked plot just in a local graveyard. With Elvis having survived this whole experience, with them losing Jesse, Elvis developed a really close bond and close relationship with both of his parents, but in particular, he was extremely close with his mom. When Elvis was 3 years old, his dad actually got arrested for forging a check in order to purchase a pig. It was only $4 back in 1938. This still ended up landing him in prison for 8 months. He was released early for good behavior. This period of time, just coming out of the Great Depression, they're already not doing well financially, and now he just got arrested and sent to prison for multiple months. Times were really tough for the Presley family. Even more difficult for them was the fact that they kept getting kicked out of each and every house that they lived in because they couldn't afford the rent. Eventually, the Presleys would end up in government-financed housing, and this would obviously put them in the poorer areas within Tupelo and Mississippi. Also, at the age of 3, Elvis would have his very first live performance at the Tupelo State Fair. He got up and mimicked the song Old Shep by the Singing Revelers, and even though people thought it was just cute, some kid up there singing, doing his best, his mom realized that he had that it quality, that he was just born a star. Because of this early exposure to music, as well as his mom's love for singing and gospel music, Elvis was exposed to all different types of music. He was always listening to the radio, listening to blues, R&B, jazz, pretty much anything. He really perfected his singing and his musical art while attending church with his mom. Yet again, this all happened in that crucial time window when Elvis was like 5 years old. We talk about this a lot. 5 years old to 10 years old. It's a pretty crucial time stretch and can really set a kid up for what they're destined to be in the future. You just never know. So whatever they're interested in, just foster that curiosity. Another thing we hear of a lot is, despite the financial difficulties that the families are having, the parents always seem to come up with some sort of monumental gift that really sets them up for success in the future. And the same is true for Elvis. At the age of 11, his mom actually spent $12.95 on a guitar for him so that he could start learning and practicing. His uncle showed him a couple of chords on there, but from there he was basically self-taught. Elvis began playing a lot of music from the Beale Street Blues, and in 1948, at the age of 13, they would actually move to Memphis, Tennessee, trying to escape all the flooding that was going on in Mississippi. Elvis sang in the church choir, where he went with his mom and dad, but he also spent tons of time just practicing, teaching himself the guitar and singing along. And because he wasn't very extroverted, this was a really good release, a really good outlet for him to really channel any of his energy that he had as a young teenager. Elvis went to Humes High School in Memphis, Tennessee, and he graduated in 1953. Man, seriously, I am Dr. Seuss. An interesting little fun fact for you guys, because I know you love fun facts, is that Elvis actually failed a music class in high school, if you can believe it. But even though he failed a music class, music was therapeutic for him. In fact, when his mom had a tuberculosis scare in 1949, he spent a lot of time just singing gospel songs to her, trying to raise her spirits. Then when he was 18, he got a truck driving job for Crown Electric. He was making $41 a week, big time, and he would save $3.98, nearly $4, so that he could save up to purchase some studio time so he could record a demo. And the whole reason he was recording this demo was so he could give it to his mom as a birthday present. Talk about the sweetest thing ever. And this just illustrates how close him and his mom really were. And it's this demo that would give rise to the king of rock and roll. The thing that really separated Elvis from the rest of the pack is that he had musical influences from blues, gospel, rock and roll, R&B. He had all of these different genres that he truly loved. He just loved music. So when he started making his own, he made this demo tape. We get this fusion of so many different genres of music into one. More importantly, Elvis was helping to dissolve the lines of segregation that existed in the 1950s. Elvis talks about how he struggled with survivor's guilt because of the death of his brother Jesse. He felt like, why me? Why was it me that made it out of that womb? Why wasn't it him that made it? And because of that, he spent the rest of his life trying to make his mom and his dad proud, feeling as if he owed that to them, because he saw how much the death of Jesse really affected his mom. Little did Elvis know that he was about to become a mega superstar. While recording this demo for his mom, the secretary for Sam Phillips at Sun Studio actually noted that Elvis had a really good ballad voice. And because she left these good notes, Sam Phillips decided to invite him back to Sun Studio. He hooked him up with a guitarist and a bassist and just let him jam for a little while. While jamming with Scotty Moore and Bill Black, Elvis decides to sing That's All Right, which is a song originally written by Arthur Crudup in 1946. But he's just goofing around and adds his own like R&B, Southern kind of rock and roll twist to it. And while they're jamming, Sam Phillips actually loves it so much that he decides to hit the record button. He ends up sending this song out to some local radio stations, and the song takes off. It becomes locally a sensation. Elvis, Scotty, and Bill would make up the Blue Moon Boys. They would actually release That's All Right as their very first hit single. And in 1954, the king of rock and roll was born. Elvis would get signed to Sun Records, And in 1954, he would get linked up with Colonel Tom Parker, who would go on to be his touring manager, business manager, music manager. And over the next couple of years, Elvis would produce multiple hit singles, continuing to skyrocket his success and continuing to push this new name, Elvis Presley. Who is this guy? In 1956, he would record his very first album, self-titled Elvis Presley, and that album would go on to hit certified platinum. And he must have been on a hardcore roll, because later that year, in October of 1956, he released another album entitled Elvis, which also hit RIAA platinum status. Elvis was extremely busy in 1956. He released 2 studio albums. He was touring nonstop, trying to get the word out, just becoming more and more popular. And he also starred in his very first movie. This movie was called Loving You. And I guess back then they would have the artist that was in the movie also work on either tracks or the full soundtrack for the movie. So Elvis was also well known for the songs that he sang for the movie. Elvis was literally everywhere. He was singing on your radio. He was acting on your TV. Literally everybody knew who Elvis was. He was becoming more and more popular by the second. Then in 1958, he starred in the movie King Creole.
But you don't care what he thinks or what I think or what I want, for that matter.
What do you want, son?
A pink convertible. Look, Pa, I got a very average brain. I'm not a brilliant student, I'm average. Do you understand?
That's not so. That's not the truth. I fought.
You fought? Sure you fought. Charlie LeGrand's got 85 bucks a week that says I can be a performer. If he's willing to take a chance, then so am I. I'm through failing.
Have you tried Taco Bell's new breakfast burrito? It's good. Moist scrambled eggs like Mama makes with cheddar cheese and sausage or bacon.
Taco Bell has a whole breakfast menu starting at just 39 cents.
Louise likes the warm caramel rolls with a hot cup of coffee.
You just drive through the takeout window and eat it on the way to work.
Well, on the border for breakfast.
And honestly, his acting in this movie was truly phenomenal. It's impressive how good of a singer and musician he is, but he's also a phenomenal actor. Also happening in 1958, the U.S. was still participating in the Selective Service System, aka the military draft. Celebrities are not excluded from the draft, apparently. As long as you're 18 years old and you're a man, then you are forced to register, and then if your name gets called, kind of like jury duty, unfortunately, you're going to get sent off overseas somewhere. And that's exactly what happened to Elvis. Now, I did find some interesting stuff in the FBI files about Elvis Presley. And one of those things was somebody had mailed in a letter to the FBI saying that Elvis was a threat to the U.S. government. He was a threat to the U.S. in general. And it's because of his crazy sexualized dance moves that he was displaying on stage. This person said that his moves were causing all of the young people in the crowd to go insane. It's only making America more sexualized, and he has to be taken care of. There's also speculation that people were looking down on Elvis because of his flashy persona and his feminine dance moves, that maybe he was somehow promoting being involved with someone who identifies as the same gender as you. And of course, that goes against all of the Christian American morals at the time, so they weren't going to stand for it. So in order to get rid of Elvis, they decided to ship him off overseas, all the way to Germany. Now I've got another quick little fun fact for you guys, but did you know that the Selective Service System is not gone? It is not over with. It is not a thing of the past. It is still lying dormant, technically still active. Now, I don't remember ever registering for the military or the draft when I was 18, but apparently it's still a thing. So if they ever need it for emergency services, they can still call any men over the age of 18 into the draft. Elvis was extremely popular with the ladies. In fact, his friends said that he had more girlfriends than guy friends. But while he was in Germany, he actually met a very, very young girl. And apparently Elvis really liked young girls because he could mold them and train them however he wanted. And he met a young lady named Priscilla Bilyeu. I think I said that right.
Very pretty young lady, but I didn't know how old she was. But at the time, she was 14, I find out later. She was very mature. And then Elvis, That's a pretty tough situation to be in.
But young girls, he liked young girls. He thought if they got 18, they were ready for Social Security.
Well,
He just liked young girls because you can manipulate a young girl better than you can an older one.
I tell you where part of that came from.
What?
Why Frank Freeman? He would walk the studio with this beautiful young girl. They were probably starlets, you know. Elvis went there for a shot. Dr. Blank, said, let me ask you a question. He said, I see Mr. Freeman, you know, with all these young girls. He said, he's 70, 80 years old. And Dr. Blank looked at him and he said, Elvis, when you get Mr. Freeman's age, he said, I'll give you something that'll allow you to do that. He said, always remember one thing. When times get down, there's always a 15-year-old girl around the corner.
Jergens just revolutionized its dry skin lotion from the inside out.
Something this extraordinary won't stay bottled up for long.
Priscilla was only 14 years old when she met Elvis. Oof. And I believe Elvis was 24 at the time. But Elvis was obsessed with Captain Marvel Jr. when he was a kid, and that never ever faded. In fact, his whole image, the black hair with the swoop, the capes that he puts on his clothing eventually, the lightning bolts that he puts on his stuff, he loves Captain Marvel Jr. and he emulated him in every way. And he said that Priscilla honestly reminded him of Mary Marvel. So it only made sense that he kind of had a thing, maybe even a type, for girls that looked like that. Elvis also figured that she was young enough that he could kind of mold her and train her into the woman that he wanted, but he did not expect that this relationship would end up getting forced into marriage by Priscilla's parents. If Elvis didn't choose to marry Priscilla, then they were going to press charges against him for being with a minor.
The day he asked me to be the best man, he told me,
Yeah.
I don't want to get married, but I'm being forced to.
Yeah.
It wasn't because he didn't love her.
No,
he did love her.
he cared
He didn't
about
want to get
her. Sure
married
he did.
because he shouldn't have been married. He
No.
didn't want to marry.
No, I know that.
Yeah, that's the key.
The BBC, Turner Broadcasting, and Time Life Video dare you to take a walk on the wild side with Trials of Life. The gripping, award-winning nature video series that exposes the struggle to survive through uncensored, shocking photography. Join acclaimed naturalist David Attenborough for a close encounter with raw nature. See the thrill of the hunt and the strategy of the kill, the relentless drive to continue the bloodline, and the miracle of birth. Call now and receive Hunting and Escaping for $9.99 and see why the law of the jungle is kill or be killed. If it captures your interest, you can get other videos about every other month. Each tape explores the harsh realities of survival in the animal world. Take a walk on the wild side with Trials of Life. Call now to order Hunting and Escaping and find out why we call them animals.
To order your Trials of Life, call 1-800-432-8800 or send $9.99 plus $3.23 shipping and handling to the address on your screen.
Elvis served 2 years in the Army, made his way all the way up to sergeant, and then he came back home. The biggest fear that he had at this point was that people would have forgotten about him. His music would be old news, he wouldn't be able to regain his career, and so he was really worried about that, but he was dead wrong. Elvis immediately got right back into making albums, touring, working on movies. He was extremely, extremely busy. Likely he was having to make up for lost time. I mean, his manager wasn't making as much money at this point. I mean, sure, he was getting royalties, but they needed some cash flow. Now, Colonel Tom took about 50% of all of Elvis's earnings, and he had a huge gambling problem. So he would oftentimes blow all of his money and then force Elvis to work more and do more to basically fund his gambling habits. There was even some times that Elvis recalled not even getting paid because the colonel gambled all his money away. While Elvis was in the Army, he was popping like 1,000 milli vanillis of that Addy. This was supposed to keep the soldiers awake when they were working these long, watches or doing these long missions or whatever they were doing. I don't know what they were doing. But they would have to stay awake for a long time. So they'd give them these pills. They basically just kept them awake for forever. They just kind of masked it under the guise that it was a mood elevator and it was kind of just a stimulant to keep you awake. At this time, they don't know this stuff is addictive and really bad for you. Elvis was not a drinker and he didn't do drugs in the conventional sense. I guess you'd say in like recreationally. And he never considered himself to be an addict because, well, the things that he was taking were all prescribed by a doctor. They were never labeled as drugs. They were called mood enhancers or stimulants to help you stay awake, sleeping pills. So he didn't start off thinking that he had a problem or that he was going to get hooked on these different drugs. But unfortunately, that's exactly how it starts. Just like in all of my stories, it seems like this massive skyrocket to fame, like overnight. Elvis wasn't even looking to be famous. He was trying to make a demo tape for his mom. Suddenly, he's a superstar. So the pressure that comes along with touring, making albums, working as hard as he was, definitely leads you down that path of needing something to help you. He had to stay up long hours. He needed the energy and the mood boost to make sure that he was in a good headspace to do all this stuff. And sometimes you can only do that with the help of some little pills. Now listen to this. Elvis was a busy dude. This is on top of touring constantly. He did a total of 24 studio albums, 17 soundtrack albums, 9 live albums, 21 compilation albums, and he had multiple other releases, but he had 311 posthumous compilation releases. 311. He has in total like 400 releases since he became famous. That's insane. Even just looking at his albums alone, he's got 24 studio albums. Yo, dude, slow down. In 1968, Elvis and Priscilla had their first and only daughter, which would be Lisa Marie Presley, another famous musician and likely another interesting, sobering story. Unfortunately, the relationship between Priscilla and Elvis was extremely toxic. As Priscilla got older, she started to realize that she was just living Elvis's life, whatever he wanted, and she was having to neglect herself most of the time. So in 1973, the two of them decided to get a divorce, which was probably one of the bigger things that really sent him further down this spiral of addiction. The first thing that really hit him was when his mother Gladys died. After both of these events is when Elvis really started upping his game in terms of using. He was starting to share it with all of his bandmates, and it got to the point where his personal doctor, Dr. Nicolopoulos, they call him Dr. Nick, was writing him tons and tons of fake/overprescribed prescriptions to maintain his habits. He began throwing himself completely into his work, just constantly making music, touring, grinding, just really burning himself out. And it was starting to show at this point. He was having to take all these different pills just to keep himself motivated as well as alert to be able to perform it all. It was starting to go downhill really quickly. But as I said, he didn't truly believe that he had a problem because these were prescribed medications. These weren't drugs. One thing that I found to be fairly ironic is how anti-drug culture he really was. In fact, he blames the Beatles for being the start of the whole acid/drug culture movement in the US in the 60s. He says that there's nothing but hippies, all these different terrorist groups forming, all these people just taking drugs and losing their minds. He says that people are out there smoking weed and taking acid, and they're all just killing themselves and killing each other because they're losing their minds on these substances. But he's taking all these uppers and downers, sleep pills, all these things so that he can maintain some sort of regularity in his schedule. But because he was so vehemently against this drug culture, he had this weird affinity for law enforcement. And I don't really quite understand why, but he just really loved law enforcement officers. He appreciated what they did. Maybe it had something to do with his military stint. He came back and he started collecting military badges. He would get inducted as honorary deputies on different police forces. And I don't know how many badges he has in total. Okay, I just looked it up. He has at least 8 known police badges, one of which is a federal drug enforcement agency badge. Now, sure, maybe he was just a collector of these badges and he really just appreciated being a celebrity inductee to the police force. But this is where things get a little murky because there's a lot of evidence to show that Elvis was actually in a lot deeper with these agencies than just collecting these badges as a collector. Elvis wrote a letter to Richard Nixon letting him know that he was in a unique position where he was actually friends with all of these different rogue culture groups, including the Weathermen, the Black Panthers, pretty much anybody in the drug culture at the time, because he was an entertainer. He was in the music industry. So he had easy access to these people, and they trusted him because he's the king of rock and roll. Who's going to suspect that the king of rock and roll is actually an undercover narc? But not only did he write this letter to Richard Nixon, he said that he'd be staying in a hotel nearby under the name John Burrows. And John Burrows would be his regular name that he would use to check in places, just an alias to kind of keep his identity hidden. And he writes this letter to Nixon asking for a federal badge to work with the narcotics division so that he can help bust all these different drug scenes that are popping up and really help take back America. Not only does Nixon agree, he meets with him. They have a nice long conversation. He presents him with this narcotics badge, a federal agent badge, and then they give him a private tour of the FBI facility. And who knows what kind of conversations they were having within this facility. Plus, he has tons of pictures with DEA agents and police officers and sheriff's departments. Kind of wild. He's even an honorary member of the Denver Police Department, which I thought was interesting. And I briefly mentioned this before, but there is a 683-page document on the vault, the FBI vault, which is a website you can search all the declassified documents. Now, they are heavily, heavily redacted, which makes you wonder what all is in there. Most of the things that are in there are threats that were made against Elvis because he was so high profile. He would get threats all the time that were investigated and reported to the FBI. And there was tons of other just random things that were in there about what he was doing at the time and his time over in Germany. We found these letters of people saying that he's an American threat, but we also find a bunch of letters talking about his understated and basically hidden his role within the DEA, within all these different police forces, helping them to fight crime. He essentially says that his tour manager, the colonel, would set him up in these different cities for his tour, and in these different cities, he would then lead these different operations, trying to infiltrate these mafia groups, all of these different crime organizations. And one of the easiest ways to do that was using pretty girls. So he would handpick pretty girls out of the crowd at his shows and ask them if they loved America. And if they said yes, he would introduce them to the FBI agents and try and get them to infiltrate the Weathermen or the Black Panthers or any of these rogue counterculture organizations that were popping up in the 1960s and the 1970s. Now, in this letter to Nixon, he very clearly states what his intentions are. He's trying to get a badge and offer his services to go undercover and work on busting these different cases. What he didn't know was that he would become maybe a pawn, maybe a secret agent, undercover agent, in trying to bring down this group of bankers and investors that were essentially money laundering, and they called themselves the Fraternity. This was called Operation Fountain Pen because they were writing a bunch of bad checks, so fountain pen. But anyways, the gist of the situation is that Elvis had bought this jet. He already had a jet, but he bought a second jet. Because he bought this second jet, he wasn't really using it that much, and it wasn't really renovated very well, so they weren't actually flying it and leasing it out to other clients and other people to use it to kind of help offset the cost of this massive expenditure. I think it was like a $600,000 jet. It was called the Jetstar. And this plane, eventually, he was convinced by these two business guys, Phil Kitzer and another guy named Freddie Pro, both of which are tied to the mob because they are money launderers. They're freaking con men. And these two guys convinced him that they were going to buy this plane from him. And then they were going to fix it up, do these renovations, make it even better than it is. And then they would lease it back to Elvis so he could still use it. But he would have to pay a lease fee of like $17,000 a month. In order to make this deal happen, he had to pay the first month and last month's lease payments up front, so like $36,000, $37,000, and then they would come up with the check after those payments were made for the jet. And they were supposed to pay, I think, $330,000 for the jet. Now, the thing that makes me believe that Vernon and Elvis were involved in this whole scheme, and this was actually a planned operation by the FBI to bring down this whole fraternity. These guys were racketeering, money laundering, and they were connected to the mafia. So they had a very good reason to try and bring them down. And the next part of this makes me feel like they were a part of the whole process. Because Vernon and Elvis, have a check issued for that first and last month's lease payments, and those checks end up bouncing, not going through, not getting accepted by the bank. So they end up contacting another bank, and they end up sending a different check over for the money, which could have been federal money. Who knows? I don't want to go on too long about it, but essentially they play back and forth with these guys who are supposed to be renovating the plane. They keep saying that they're going to pay this money. They have the money wired over or sent over or write these checks. And of course, all of them bounce. These wire transfers never go through. They never see this money until finally they do see this $330,000. It finally makes its way over. And so that's kind of how these schemes work. They'll lead you along. Things will go wrong for a while, but then they'll come clean. They'll actually be good on one of the deals, which will then give you a reinvested faith in what these guys can do. Oh, they're not screwing me. They're actually helping me. And so maybe he already had one jet that he was doing this with, and this was the second jet that they were trying to get out of Elvis Presley. After they had bought this jet, they took it down. They immediately got a mortgage out on the jet for $1 million, and then essentially just walked away and said, great, you guys own an airplane now. They were supposed to be renovating it, getting it all tip-top shape so that it can be flying, and they kept saying it was just waiting on different testing and waiting on this or waiting on that, before finally they saw this newspaper article talking about this bank in the West Indies, which just happened to be the same bank that this Freddie Pro guy was sending all this money from. They realized very quickly that this sounds like a scam and they better figure this out. So Elvis and Vernon end up sending one of their pilots out to Miami where this plane was at and have him collect this plane and bring it back. In the process of all of this money laundering, all of these fraudulent checks, all of this shady business stuff going on, all of this white-collar crime, finally the FBI had reason to move in, and they had probable cause to arrest these guys. They had agents following them all around wherever they were going, basically witnessing all these deals. So they were already using undercover agents to follow them. What makes you think that they weren't using Vernon and Elvis to kind of entrap these guys and set this whole deal up? Now, it's very important to note that these guys were prosecuted, but they only were sentenced to 10 years in jail. And they actually would likely only serve like 5 to 7 years if they were on good behavior. And that's exactly what happened. Now, 3 of the other guys that were involved with this fraternity were huge money launderers. They were lawyers. I don't really know what the other guys did for work, but they were money launderers. And they were involved in this racketeering conspiracy where they were basically frauding people out of all of these different pieces of their property, basically scamming them and disappearing. So the FBI finally had these guys charged, but if they had anybody within that whole operation that was reason for them getting caught, aka Elvis, Vernon, any of the undercover agents that were there following them around or hanging out with them, then these guys would be prime people to get into the witness protection program, like immediately, because the guys that were within the fraternity also had ties to the mafia.
What you're about to see has been verified by recently declassified government documents and Luc Dionne's own extensive research.
Our story begins in May of 1976 when Elvis wanted to sell one of his airplanes. Besides the famous Lisa Marie, Elvis owned 3 smaller jets, a Lockheed Jetstar, a Jet Commander, and a Dassault Falcon. In early 1976, Elvis told his father, who handled all of his personal finances, that he wanted to sell the Jetstar. Vernon was loyal to his son, but was apparently not a very good businessman. Vernon was introduced to a man named Frederick Peter Pro in May of 1976. Pro talked Vernon into getting involved with a very complicated leasing arrangement with his company. The Jetstar wasn't airworthy, and Pro also said he would facilitate repairs. But Frederick Peter Pro was, in reality, a con man, a member of a criminal group called the Fraternity, a group with direct ties to organized crime. It has been estimated that the fraternity managed to con at least $2 billion from people all over the world. And by the spring of 1977, according to an attorney familiar with the case, the Presley estate had lost more than $1 million.
All right, Luke, to summarize, what do you think happened to Elvis Presley?
Well, I think that Elvis got involved in a very dangerous FBI undercover operation, and in order to protect himself, a member from his family has to arrange his disappearance.
Of all the important safety features we put in the new Camry, some may seem a bit extravagant.
Stronger body construction, child protector rear door locks, rear seat headrests, adjustable front seatbelt anchors, standard driver's side airbag, available anti-lock brakes.
But when it came to safety, we didn't ask what it costs. We asked what it could save. The all-new 1992 Toyota Camry. We just couldn't leave well enough alone.
So Elvis's career is slowly declining, but it makes me wonder if maybe the decline of Elvis's career and his slow slip into these drug habits might have been a planned thing. It might have been at this point when he had to go into witness protection so that he could testify against these guys and hopefully put them behind bars and then stay safe after they're released in 10 years, because they're probably going to come find him. And he's Elvis Presley. He's not going to be that hard to find. So it might have been safer for him to enter into this witness protection program. And he had buddies all over the place in law enforcement, including the president and J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI. So it doesn't seem too far-fetched that that might be possible.
At the time that Presley was defrauded by those conmen, the Federal Bureau of Investigation were involved in a highly confidential undercover operation called Operation Fountain Pen regarding the illegal activities of a group of conmen called the Fraternity that comprised approximately 30 to 40 of the world's top conmen.
What's the importance of the Presley case in Operation Fountain Pen?
Well, the Presley case was the catalyst case for the FBI to stop temporarily the illegal activity of at least 2 members of the fraternity.
What do you mean temporarily?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the fraternity was an organization that comprised 30 to 40 of the world's top conmen. Now, the Presley case involved only 2 members of the fraternity. Now, this organization was still going around, you know, everywhere around the world, defrauding people after the Presley case was done, but temporarily they succeeded in stopping the fraternity.
Do you think it was dangerous enough to justify a sudden disappearance?
Well, that's the point. If you look at the criminal background of certain individuals who were involved in the Presley case, it would be highly justifiable.
Do you think that Elvis was put under the witness protection program?
Well, the fact that the 2 members of the fraternity were involved with Presley in the Jetstar deal were themselves put under the witness security program is something in itself. If it was dangerous enough for the prime suspect to be put under the witness security program, it was surely good enough for Elvis Presley as the main victim to be put under the program. But Elvis Presley was a federal agent. There's no doubt about that.
The Elvis Conspiracy is sponsored in part by Jif. For more fresh roasted peanut taste and aroma, choosy moms choose Jif.
And this Operation Fountain Pen that he was involved with led right into another operation called Abscam, which was essentially the same program looking into fraudulent money transactions and money laundering and racketeering charges. And they were looking into politicians and major political figures. So, I mean, the fact that this snowballed right into a more serious investigation involving bigger people seems like even more reason for Elvis to be involved in this witness protection program. It made me think that this whole downward spiral into his addiction might have been either a show or completely planned so that it was kind of like a build-up to what was going to happen. The fact of the matter is everybody around Elvis, including his very close friends, his bodyguards, people that's been with him since he was in high school, since he was young, he started firing those people. He had a really awful temper. He gained tons of weight. And apparently towards the end, he was so bad on his painkiller and just all these pills he was on, it caused him to be so constipated that he hadn't even pooped for like 4 months. Everyone close to Elvis says that they wouldn't be surprised if this ended up killing him because he refused to get help because he denied that he even had a problem. The whole time he's still under the impression that, well, these are prescription meds, so it's okay for me to do this. even though he was using his bodyguard and his bodyguard's 5-month-old son, pretty much anybody that worked with him, he was using their names to get these prescriptions illegally.
I had a situation, I must tell you, that one time a liquid Demerol came to the house in my son's name, and my son was like 4 or 5 months old. And there was on this liquid Demerol bottle, Brian West. I went to Schwab's. I said, I want this taken off right now. I want it removed from your records. If you ever send another drug up to that house in my wife, or my son's name, you're gonna be in trouble. You're gonna be in serious trouble.
I watched this really awesome documentary called Elvis Found Alive. Now, this documentary has a form that I'm assuming came from their FOIA request, but I couldn't find it, at least unredacted, in the FBI vault. But they found a document that specifically says witness protection, and the very first name on there is Elvis Presley. I looked at the number on the page that they had. It was ME871994 or 6 or something. And that number, I put it in the PDF and searched for it in multiple different places. And I was able to find it on multiple different documents. And it didn't really explain much about it, but it referenced the number, and it would always have like Elvis's name and a couple other people's names, which made me think that it was in reference to these different witness cases, because it would always be updates on what was going on with the different suspects and defendants, so that basically they were keeping it in their file so that if anything happened, they were able to adjust their witness protection plan to accommodate Elvis or any of these other people in witness protection. Then I found this report addressed to the FBI from London, and it was talking about Elvis and his death. There's not a lot of information on the page, and what little information that's on there is redacted, including dates. They don't want you to know when this stuff was talked about. It seems like they may be talking about some sort of relocation. I don't know. And then we've got this other little piece right here that says the confidential informant from Memphis. Come on, that's gotta be Elvis. Now, there was 2 things that I found to be very interesting. Number one, Elvis is seen multiple times in this DEA tracksuit, sweatsuit thing. He wears it a lot. In fact, he wore it the day that he died. But this DEA tracksuit can only be acquired by actual agents or actual people that are employed and staff of the DEA. AKA, Elvis can't just go in as a civilian and buy one of these. So he obviously had it given to him because he is some sort of agent or working with the DEA. The other thing I found interesting was that Elvis Presley was awarded a Lifetime Member International Narcotics Officer Association plaque medal award thing. Basically just saying that in recognition of the outstanding loyalty and contributing support of narcotics law enforcement, this award and special honor is bestowed upon Elvis Presley. They're clearly awarding him for his support and his efforts. I'm sure he sent financial support, but it's also saying outstanding loyalty and contributing support, which makes me think he was more involved. He was so involved he got an award. Even Priscilla writes in Elvis by the Presleys, he was, in fact, a law enforcement officer. She says maybe Elvis, the federal agent, seems a long way from the Elvis who longed to be a guru like Diamata. When it was law enforcement, his motivation was the same. He couldn't be ordinary. He wasn't ordinary. Not only was Elvis working for the feds, he had an undercover agent that was working within his band. He was undercover as a musician. There's even a letter here recognizing him for his service, allowing this dude to be in his band. He knew this dude was in his band. He was a part of this operation. Now, the mainstream reports would continue coming back, talking about Elvis's increasingly distraught, unhealthy, plainly sad appearance and demeanor. He was not the same Elvis that we had come to love and respect and enjoy. This slow downhill spiral left people feeling like he really didn't have much time left. If he didn't get help, which he wasn't going to because he didn't think he had a problem, then he was definitely going to die because of this. And sure enough, on August 16th, 1977, Elvis was found face down in his bathroom, pants down because he was sitting on the toilet. And unfortunately, he still never got to poop. And he was found unresponsive. The official cause of death was ruled a heart attack, but there's supposedly toxicology results out there that say that there was a wealth of different drugs in his system. Just a lot of different drugs that if you mix them together are a very, very bad concoction for anybody. However, I have not seen that toxicology report. All I have seen is a 2-page autopsy that gives you zero information, and the handwriting is so bad that the information that is provided is not really legible or readable to me. And as per usual, this might mean something, might mean nothing, but I find it pretty interesting that they left his height and weight blank on his autopsy report. Why would you do that if this is really Elvis? Now, there is speculation that Elvis and Colonel Parker decided that they were going to do this whole fake his death thing, and they were going to enter him into witness protection, because Elvis can't just disappear. He's too big to just disappear.
What did the others think about the fake death idea? Colonel Parker, Dr. Nick?
The colonel said it was a great move, that it'd be a great way to make money off the fans. I was more valuable to him dead.
So they had to come up with some sort of story to make him disappear. In order to do that, I think they might have just planned this whole downward spiral into the drug thing. Maybe he was never that addicted at all. It was just an act for him to slowly start building this persona that he was on the edge and at risk of dying. In fact, everybody recalls how much he would actually eat in terms of just terrible food. He would eat a pound of bacon for breakfast. He would eat cheeseburgers, hamburgers, just nothing but fattening cholesterol foods. It's no wonder that he ended up gaining weight.
Elvis Presley was divorced from Priscilla, exhibiting bizarre behavior and desperately struggling with an addiction to prescription drugs that threatened his life. Despite his recent detox attempt, Elvis was still binging on drugs and food.
He'd eat a pound of bacon for breakfast, burnt bacon, 6 egg omelet, potatoes, biscuits, hamburgers, cheeseburgers.
He'd have beef nearly every meal, cream potatoes, he liked it those. And we'd have POOLHOUSE steaks, many steaks, we had all kinds of steaks.
You might as well just take cholesterol and inject it into your vein.
In my opinion, people who do drugs and narcotics typically lose weight instead of gain weight because they don't eat as much. Unfortunately, Elvis was found on his bathroom floor and he was not able to be revived. Officially, the reports came in that Elvis had in fact passed away.
Good evening. Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack. He was found at his home in Memphis, not breathing. His road manager tried to revive him. He failed. A hospital tried to revive him. It failed. His doctor pronounced him dead at 3 o'clock this afternoon. The end at an early age of one of the 2 most spectacular careers in the history of American entertainment, the other being Frank Sinatra's.
But right from the very start, things didn't feel right. They were already announcing that he was dead and the reasons why. Before they had any of the results back, they didn't have any tox screens back. They had no way of knowing that any of this stuff was true. They hadn't even done an autopsy. Now, another real interesting fun fact for you guys is that while Elvis's body was taken to the morgue and was awaiting processing, there was actually a plan by 3 grave robbers who were going to go in and steal his body and then demand like a $10 million ransom to get it back. And one of the guys actually ended up being an FBI informant. His name was Ronnie Lee Atkins. And because he snitched on everybody, they obviously shut this whole thing down and nobody actually stole Elvis's body. They were planning to, but when they were questioned about it, they said that they were only planning to do it so that they could show how vulnerable he was and they would encourage them to take his body back to Graceland where it belonged. But I thought it was kind of weird that an FBI informant was in charge of possibly stealing the body or manipulating the body. Why would they want to do that? Well, I'll tell you why they'd want to do that. Because Gene Smith, Elvis's cousin, very vividly recalls being at Elvis's funeral and looking at the body that they had in the casket. And number one, the pictures of this body looks way too young. It looks like a 30-year-old Elvis. He died when he was 42, he was heavily overweight, and he was not in good shape. But yet he looks like the 30-year-old great version of Elvis. Next, his cousin notes that either his hair was glued on and he could see the glue on his hairline, or he was sweating. So if he was sweating, then he wasn't dead.
When we viewed the body for the last time,
I stood there quite a while looking at his hands, and of course he was always breaking bricks with his hands. He had calluses on the bottom of his hand, and big old rough-looking knuckles. His nose looked kind of puggy looking, and his right sideburn was sticking out, straight out looked about an inch. And his hairline looked as if it had been a hairpiece, something glued on somewhere. It just didn't look right. And his hands was just as smooth as a newborn's baby's behind, you know. And it seemed like it was sweating around his hairline. It could have been sweat, it could have been glue, I don't know. But I just didn't believe it was him.
And Cousin Gene Smith said that the hands looked like they were as smooth as a baby's bottom. And if you knew Elvis, you knew that he had real rough hands because he was clumsy, he worked with his hands, he worked on cars, he just was a guy's guy, and he had man hands. So for his hands to be perfectly smooth like that, almost like they were wax, kind of makes you wonder. But a lot of people speculate that they might have actually brought in an Elvis wax piece from a local wax museum, and then they had this casket with an air conditioning unit in it to keep this wax cool so it didn't melt wherever it was. That's why you see hundreds of people carrying this one casket for a guy who didn't even weigh over 300 pounds. Now, apparently, Elvis wouldn't just use John Burrows to check into hotels. He also seemed to use this as his undercover agent name. In fact, he even wrote it in the letter to Nixon, talking about how this was his alias at the hotel room. So it's a pretty common name for him to use at this point. But there's a lot of people who speculate that the reason he went into witness protection was because of these ties to the mafia and his fear for his life. However, there's other people who believe that he was on such a negative downward spiral because of the immense demands from him that maybe him and Avicii and Tupac all faked their deaths so that they could just escape the world of being famous, having people demand so much from you, even when you don't feel like you're able to give it to them. So the pressures of just being famous and having those kind of demands on you, I mean, it would lead me to want to fake my death. I know that. But because nobody really trusted the official story right out the gates, it just didn't feel right. Something was off. Plus, nobody knew how deep and dark his addiction issues were at this point. For them to realize that he just had a random heart attack on the toilet didn't really make any sense. They'd come to find out he had 4 months of poop backed up because, well, he was constipated, which typically happens when you're abusing pills. So it made a lot of sense. But this got so bad that he was likely just retaining water and blowing up like a balloon, gaining tons of weight. But another theory for this is that maybe he was gaining all this weight so that he could either lose it when he went into witness protection, or he would be overweight and would be able to easily change, kind of be this, I don't know, massive version of Elvis that people may not recognize. Either way, there's some things that have come up since his passing that have led tons of people to wonder, is Elvis still alive? First of all, his tombstone. Elvis's middle name is ARON, but it's not ARON. It's just ARON. So on his tombstone, when they spelled it Elvis ARON with 2 A's, Elvis ARON Presley, it was kind of weird. It didn't make any sense. On his legal death certificate, on his legal birth certificate, on anything that he ever signed, he would sign it with his middle name, 1A, ARON. And I'm not sure if that was intentional, but ARON with only 1A would be missing only one other letter from his stillborn brother, Jesse Garon Presley. So that simple typo on something as monumental as Elvis's tombstone just makes people feel so strange. On top of that, I guess he wanted to be buried next to his mom, but this tombstone was buried between, I believe, his dad and his aunt, which is not what he wanted. But here's the strange part. Whose tombstone is in Elvis's spot? Jesse Garon Presley. And I mentioned before that he was actually buried in a different little cemetery in an unmarked grave. So this is just a little tombstone keeping his place, just a little remembrance stone. But I would doubt that they dug up his little body. At least I hope not. If the real Elvis is still out there, then that would save the space next to his mom for him to then be buried there, per his wishes. And one thing I found to be very interesting was that Gail Brewer Giorgio actually takes it upon herself to start looking into this whole thing because she doesn't trust the official narrative.
I'm hungry.
Yeah, can you cook something? Cook something, cook something. Cook something.
Enjoy that great ballpark taste in no time. With Ballpark Singles, individually wrapped for your microwave to steam in that flavor you love and the big juicy taste you expect from a ballpark.
You could be a chef.
I'll stick with Ballpark.
Ballpark Singles, such a big juicy taste, they plump when you cook them.
Well, there is no doubt about it. Elvis Presley was a federal agent. His power and clout went to the White House. President Nixon made his appointment. We also know by records that Elvis Presley received a call from President-elect Jimmy Carter at the end of 1976, and President Carter wanted to appoint Elvis to a special commission in the Carter administration. Another call was placed by the FBI between President Carter and Elvis on August 15, 1977. Elvis's name is listed in the Justice Department's Black Book as a federal agent. Plus, there's books at Graceland that seem to be clues. And during Elvis's last concert tour, he made some very strange remarks on stage.
We had a meeting of this. I have been a member of this organization for 5 years, the International Narcotics Enforcement Officers Association. In recognition of the outstanding loyalty and contribution to the support of narcotic law enforcement, this award of special honor is bestowed upon Elvis Presley in testimony, so-and-so, lifetime member, International Narcotics Enforcement Officers Association. So I just got that.
It sounded like he was saying goodbye. He would say things like, I am, and I was. And he also said to the audience, he said, I may not look good tonight, but I will look good in my coffin. And beyond that, Elvis Presley, on the evening of August 15th and into the early hours of August 16th, made an emergency dental appointment to have some work done. That doesn't sound like a man who was planning to take his life in a few hours.
And one of the things somebody tells her is that if you compare the note that he wrote to Richard Nixon and you compare the death certificate, the same person that wrote that note, aka Elvis Presley, wrote his own death certificate. And after getting it analyzed by a handwriting expert, he did confirm that it is the same writer that wrote both documents.
She supplied me with a copy of a letter written to President Nixon in 1970 and the death certificate or medical examiner's report at the time of his reported death. I examined these two documents and compared them by measuring the slant of the handwriting, the spacing between the letters, spacing between the words, the size of the letters, and the individual letter formations. I also made transparent photocopies where I could lay one photocopy, a transparent copy on top of another one for close comparison. I examined these under transmitted light with a light table. The result of my examination was that I found that the slant matched on both documents, that the size of the letters was the same, the spacing between the letters was the same, and many of the individual letter forms were the same. My conclusions after this exhaustive examination was, in my professional opinion as a document examiner, that the same person who wrote the letter to President Nixon also wrote the Elvis Presley death certificate or medical examiner's report of Elvis Presley.
So how did Elvis write his own death certificate? And then, of course, we've got multiple sightings of Elvis all around the country. I don't have time to go through all of the sightings, but one I found particularly interesting was one that happened on August 23rd, 1991. A young lady named Kelly and her boyfriend were headed out to a restaurant to eat. As they were approaching the restaurant, they saw a guy hop out with some security team, and they made their way into the restaurant. The first thing they noticed was that this guy looked exactly like Elvis. This is obviously in 1991. Elvis is gone. So why is Elvis walking into this restaurant? She decides that she has to capture this moment to make sure that she gets proof of it, because nobody's going to believe her otherwise. So she runs home with her boyfriend, they grab her camera, and they head right back to the restaurant hoping he's still there. Sure enough, he's sitting in the back, eating, still doing his thing, still looking like Elvis. And she goes up and without, I don't even know, just like goes up in front of him, just starts flashing pictures at him. And she actually is able to catch a couple of pictures. But the weird thing is, he jumps up with his security guys. One of the security guys is trying to keep her from taking more pictures, while the other security guy bolts it out the back door with this Elvis-looking character. We do have photographic evidence of this encounter, And then in one of the documentaries that I watched, they talk about how the business owner, he actually remembers this happening. He said that the guy did in fact look like Elvis, and it was really strange that they got up and ran away because she was taking photos. Even more strange, when they checked the reservation book to see who had made the reservation, the gentleman's name was John Burrows.
My name is Kelly Wadsworth. On August 23rd of 1991, I saw Elvis Presley at Winesburg Inn in Clyde, Ohio.
On the night of August 23rd, 1991, at approximately 6 p.m., Kelly and her boyfriend observed a man fitting Elvis's description exiting a car that was suspiciously parked in the back of the restaurant.
And I said, God, this guy really looks like him. I said, we've got to go home and get the camera and take some pictures. Nobody's going to believe me.
A few minutes later, Kelly returned with the camera.
I checked in the lobby. Nobody was there. I looked in the bar side. Nobody was there. And then that's when I spotted him. He was sitting in the restaurant. When I took my first picture and the click went off, I shocked him off. The bodyguard ran towards me, and then he ran around the side and grabbed the stuff from the table. And then they started running out to the back door. I thought maybe I can get a couple more good shots. What is very strange to me is if this wasn't Elvis, then why was he getting up in a hurry after I took a picture? In fact, the bodyguard even came towards me to keep me from taking another shot. I never dreamed this was going to happen.
At the restaurant, we talked with hostess Chris Davidson about Kelly's sighting. Chris remembered the incident and described the mysterious man.
He had dark, real dark, blackish, almost bluish hair on the long sideburns. Like he always dressed like Elvis. He had lots of rings. He was a little heavy set, a little shorter than I was.
Who was this man?
In my opinion, one of the more convincing pieces of all of this is that Elvis had 2 life insurance policies on himself that were actually cashed in a little bit before he ended up passing away. These life insurance policies were cashed in. They were his own life insurance policy, but he had one final life insurance policy that wasn't cashed in. The significance of this is that if he was in fact still alive and he cashed in on these policies, then that would be insurance fraud. And he cashed in on these other policies before he had even passed away. So I basically just think he liquidated them. I'm not really sure. And then the other interesting piece of this is that there was a $1 million bank account lump sum of cash that just mysteriously vanished and has to this day not been located.
One of the questions I asked myself while researching the Presley arrangement was, if Elvis did indeed fake his death, how would he support himself? He would need money. 3 facts came to light when I began to research this question. My sources tell me that in March of 1977, a full 3 months before Elvis died, he cashed in 3 life insurance policies for just shy of $2 million. Shortly after his death, fact number 2, there was a checking account, a private checking account, with an excess of $1 million that vanished and has not been explained as yet. Third fact, there's still a remaining insurance policy that is yet to be cashed. What is the significance of this? It's just this. The 3 life insurance policies that were cashed were paid up. There's no fraud involved. Those life insurance policies are owned by the insured. The third policy, or the remaining policy, I should say, was not paid up. If a surviving heir would cash in that policy and the person who was insured were still alive, that would be insurance fraud. The checking account, I can't explain. It vanished. $1 million vanished. Is Elvis still alive? The feasibility certainly seems to be getting stronger.
And you'd imagine that if you were going to disappear and go into witness protection, you would likely need money. Not only was money missing, but multiple cars, tons of jewelry, just all kinds of different personal belongings Elvis took with him. So we've got a good reason why he would do this. We've got a relatively good understanding of how he might do this, especially with all of his connections in law enforcement. We've got a relative timeline of when he had this kind of planned out. He probably knew after going through this whole Operation Fountain Pen situation, being extorted for his plane, he really needed to set this up if he was going to go through with it. And he claims that he had a lot of help from the colonel. Basically, without the colonel, none of this would have been possible. So it makes you wonder what the colonel knew before he ended up passing away. But we've got to figure out, where did he go? And who is this other guy that is on the floor dead in Elvis Presley's bathroom? Well, I found an article that says that it was some generically named guy named Scott that Elvis had met because he had reached out to him asking for help because he had been diagnosed with a terminally ill form of cancer, and he was extremely broke and really needed help to make sure that his family was taken care of when he was gone.
What are you building? You said it yourself. A robot? A battery. Move!
So Elvis made him a deal that he would pay him, I really don't know how much, I think it was like $50,000, which was a lot back then, allowing Elvis to slip away. This Scott guy agreed and basically just kept him up to date as to how his health condition was doing. And then eventually it got to a point where he had said his goodbyes and his health condition had gotten so bad that they decided that this was the moment that they got to take advantage of. Apparently Scott had gone through extensive plastic surgery to make himself look like Elvis. Elvis had to work on losing weight so that he looked more like Scott because Scott wasn't as heavy as he was. Now, another piece of information that I thought was interesting about this whole Elvis situation, the autopsy, obviously there was different skin samples and DNA samples that were collected. There was a gentleman who was able to get his hands on a DNA sample that was confirmed from a biopsy that was done on Elvis. Now, he used this biopsy to generate a DNA profile for Elvis. After generating that profile, he decided to compare that with some of the DNA collected during the autopsy. How he got his hands on this, with it being sealed until 2027, I don't know. But I am excited in 2 years to figure out what happened. But he compares these two DNA samples, which should both be from Elvis Presley. The DNA from the biopsy is not in fact a match for the DNA of Elvis Presley.
He said, if you will let us use these specimens that we know were specimens of Elvis's biopsies, the two biopsies, and we know this was the specimen of the cadaver they buried, we could send them off to a reputable DNA lab, and so that the notoriety of Elvis doesn't influence it, we'll label them John Doe 1 and John Doe 2 and see if they match. If they match, then Elvis is dead. He was in the casket. If they don't match, then the man in the casket was not the same one that was the entertaining Elvis. And the results was that the two first specimens were alike. Of course, they both came from Elvis' liver, but they did not match the cadaver, the man who was purported to be Elvis. They were different people.
So that begs the question, if the body that they found is not the same DNA as confirmed DNA of the actual Elvis Presley, then where is Elvis? Then just 4 months after his death, there is this mysterious picture just taken by a gentleman who was vacationing there at Graceland with his family, and he ends up taking this forever infamous photo called the pool house photo. Now, his story is that he didn't notice it right away. In fact, he didn't even notice it after looking at the pictures periodically over the course of the years. It wasn't until, I think, like 10 years later, he looks at these pictures again and just happens to notice something that he didn't notice before. If you look through the window of this screen door very, very carefully, and you enhance this photo to a point where you can actually see what's back there, you can very clearly see an Elvis-like looking character sitting there watching people walk past this pool house, which is where all of the gravestones for all of the dead Presleys are at. This is wild. Kodak actually verified the footage and said that it was not tampered with. It was in the same line, in the same roll, and in the same position of the roll of the film, and that nothing was done to this film to alter it. So this photo seems legit.
For curiosity's sake, not that I'd know who was there, I wanted to see what it was. I took my son's magnifying glass, put it on the picture, started pulling it away from the picture to get a good visible view of it, and I was just shocked. I could not believe what I saw. My God, I had Elvis Presley sitting in the doorway. I've had the negatives examined by Kodak. And Kodak basically says that they are original. They have not been tampered with in any way. They were taken in sequence, uncut by the negatives, being original. They can tell the emulsion number of the film was manufactured in '77. Each roll of film that is manufactured has a manufacturing date on it in the emulsion number. You couldn't pay Kodak to say something like that if it weren't true.
And then we get these random videos of this random visitor, this old guy with super white beard, and he's out here just doing random stuff on the property at Graceland. He very clearly looks up at the camera as if he knows it's there. He is wearing an Elvis t-shirt, which I found to be extremely interesting. And in another video, he actually makes this weird, like, two-finger head scratch, almost like a hand signal. It's very strange. But who is this guy? This mysterious guy, this mysterious old man who would just so happen to be the same age as Elvis Presley, about anyways. These videos lead people to believe that Elvis was visiting Graceland. He's definitely been there, and we see this same guy pop up at Elvis's 82nd birthday, and this guy is surrounded by security guards. What are all these security guards doing around this random guy with white hair that could possibly be Elvis? But then we get this breakthrough moment in the case. Everybody is talking about this pastor, Pastor Bob Joyce. Pastor Bob pops up basically out of nowhere. He becomes the pastor of this church called the Household of Faith, and he is very active, not only on social media, but he's a very active gospel musician. But let's take it one step further. Not only is he a really successful gospel musician, but he sounds exactly, not kind of, not a little bit like, exactly like Elvis Presley.
Who made the flowers to bloom in the spring?
And who hung the moon and the stars in the sky?
He lights the way when the road is long,
and with his love to guide you, he walks beside you.
Who gives me courage to go on from there?
And who gives me faith that will never die? Somebody bigger than you and I.
And he has a lot of the same facial features that he has. One of the things I noticed was his gap between his teeth, but actually Elvis had a gap between his teeth, and he had a crown or like a cap put on his tooth so that it would actually fill that gap in because, well, he's a major entertainer, he's in movies, he's got to be perfect. And funny story, little fun fact, he actually inhaled that cap from his teeth and it went all the way into his lungs during the filming of Jailhouse Rock. And they actually had to go in through his throat with this little device and pull out the cap from his lungs. It was really close to his vocal cords, which could have been real serious for him. So if you take the cap and you remove that, which is a good way to help him blend in, he's now old, he's got super white hair, he's extremely religious, which Elvis had always been known to be very religious, stemming all the way back to his gospel roots with his mom. Some of Elvis's first gospel performances, How Great Thou Art, a few others, I don't remember the names. These would be favorites of Elvis when he was younger, and these are some of Pastor Bob's favorite songs to play for the congregation.
With my head out low in the darkness as black
is to work for thee, to tell of thy love wherever I may be. I'll be pleased to go, or willing, Lord, to stay. Just let me know thy will, dear Lord, I pray. trouble and I'm blue. I don't know what to do. Let me know thy will. Dear Lord, I pray.
There's also comparisons of Bob Joyce's laugh compared to Elvis's laugh.
Always will. Hang loose. I'll be with you in a minute.
Hang loose. We're going to get through this by the grace of God.
Sing it, baby. Oh, God. Oh, man, I tell you. Did somebody die?
There's comparisons of him and just his mannerisms and some of the ways that he is. He's got the same exact guitar as Elvis Presley, and apparently the guy just has an obsession with Elvis, is what he says, and it's just all very strange. That's all I can say.
Will you please heal me or pray for my son or cast the devil out of this prayer or whatever? And when they tried to do it, it didn't happen. Well, where's Jesus at? Let's find Jesus. Where's Jesus at? Let's find Jesus. He can do it.
Then we see these videos at Graceland with this white-haired guy. It looks just like Bob Joyce. Now, I am going to burst a couple bubbles here real quick because in my research, I heard a lot of people talking about how Bob Joyce's wife was actually one of Elvis's old girlfriends, but that was actually proven to be false. That was just somebody who labeled this girl in a picture with her name. And then I also heard that he was present at Lisa Marie's private funeral. That also was proven to be false. There was a guy there that looked like that, but it was actually Lisa Marie's ex-husband, like one of her ex-husbands. So it wasn't actually Bob Joyce. In fact, he was in church services that day. He was not at Lisa Marie's funeral service. But I did go down a Truth Finder search of Bob Joyce, as well as Walina Joyce, which is his wife, to figure out if these are real people, if this is his, witness protection alias. Is there a real Truth Finder thing to find? Does he have a backstory? Is he the same age? Is any of this true? And unfortunately, Pastor Bob would be significantly younger than Elvis. Elvis would be like 90 today, and Pastor Bob is only like 73. So huge age difference, but I mean, you can fudge the age. Elvis always had a baby face. Maybe he still looks young. But I was able to find good old Bob Joyce as well as his wife on there. Unfortunately, it really does seem like they've got a pretty solid background. Like nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There also wasn't anything definitive to say that Bob Joyce really existed. He didn't have any businesses. There was no workplaces listed outside of the church, but that didn't start until 2012. And there's really not a whole lot of pictures of Bob Joyce before 2012 when he started doing this whole YouTube congregation. But I did find something really weird on Truth Finder. I was looking through for Bob Joyce, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of Robert Joyces out there. But one of the ones that I found, the ages actually matched what Elvis's age would be. And then even stranger, if you look down, there's a Lisa Marie Joyce, which is a very strange name to have, when you're suspected of being Elvis, whose daughter's name is Lisa Marie Presley, and your known relative is Lisa Marie Joyce. And I didn't think that this was the real Bob Joyce, but there also wasn't a ton of information on here. So it made me wonder if this was like some sort of fake account or some sort of weird paperwork mix-up within the Witness Protection Agency. I really don't know, but I did find it interesting. Might mean something, might mean nothing, but honestly, what the F? Now, you would think that Bob would just come out and be like, yo, I'm not Elvis, like, stop talking about it. Part of me thinks he actually likes the attention, especially if he is a huge Elvis fan. But the other part of me is wondering, because he never directly outright says, I'm not Elvis. All he does say, I was born Bob Joyce, I will die Bob Joyce, but he doesn't say that he's not Elvis. In fact, to the congregation, he even vaguely mentions that he could be one of multiple different people that people seem to be accusing him of being. But I couldn't find anybody else that they were accusing him of being, just Elvis. So why is he being so elusive and so vague and so just shifty about it? It's weird.
This church is not running some kind of scam or scheme to make money, to get a following, to make people believe that I'm somebody that I'm not. I am no other person. I could name some names here, but you know, I'm supposed to be at least one of 3 different people. I got to be one of them. I can't be myself. I've got to be one of those guys. But I'm neither one of them. I am Bob Joyce. I was born Bob Joyce, and I will die Bob Joyce. Now, I can't help what other people believe and think about me, but I'm telling the truth. So, and another thing, nobody in this church, including myself, receives any salary for what we do for the Lord.
Just look at this. Bob Joyce is playing a live concert, and if you try and get tickets for that concert, well, good luck. The VIP package is sold out at $2,000 a piece. Then there's different tiers ranging from $225 all the way down to $65 for your general admission to see Bob Joyce. What is going on here? Maybe it's going to be some big reveal or something. I don't know. Or maybe he's Elvis. And I was kind of looking into things because I didn't really understand the witness protection program that well. And I was curious, like, okay, there's been tons of sightings of this John Burrows guy. This whole story about John Burrows has now gotten out. People are hip to it. These FBI vault files were released. And now we have proof that he might be going by the name John Burrows. Tons of people had spent tons of time locating him, putting in different sightings, like calling it in, and they even traced his credit card information. And this credit card trail was kind of strange because it was in fact Elvis's money and Elvis's credit cards, but it was traveling around with this John Burrows guy, apparently.
But you know, I think the most interesting thing I've seen of everything is this paper trail of John Burrows. I received a call from a gentleman with an amazing story to tell. This man was something of a computer hacker. Intrigued by our show, he tried to track down Elvis Presley's credit report. He typed in the name and found nothing. He tried again, only this time he typed in Elvis's social security number. Bingo. Up came some information, and next to Elvis's number was a second number. When he typed in that number, up came the name Elvis Presley. Curiously, another name also appeared, John Burrows. John Burrows' name was woven together with Elvis Presley's throughout this lengthy credit report. This was just the beginning.
But I wanted to know if your identity gets compromised, if too many people know about you or find out about you, that obviously destroys the whole operation. So do they reissue you a new identity with a new backstory, with a new everything? And it says yes. In the event that something's compromised, you have to get a new alias, a new everything. Basically just Better Call Saul status. Just keep on changing your identity because you'll never be safe otherwise. So I thought it was very possible for him to have switched from this John Burrows character, which he was playing as a federal agent, and then seems to have been his initial name after he went into witness protection. Maybe that got burnt out and found out, so he had to switch over to Bob Joyce. And I was fully on board with the whole Bob Joyce thing, but then I found those discrepancies, and the case started to fall apart a little bit. It had me less and less convinced by the time I was done researching good old Bob Joyce. He is a really interesting character. He's got like 5 produced gospel albums. The dude loves the Lord. The church burned down at a certain point, which was kind of interesting. But I looked at his truth finder, and his house was only worth like $10,500. So he says he's not a very rich man. He's a fairly poor man. And maybe that's true. Maybe he only has a small property or a small amount of money on his truth finder. He actually is still holding on to that random $1 million plus the life insurance policies that he claimed in on. But that all turned around when I found out there was another possible lead on who may or may not be Elvis Presley. And you can imagine he's 90 years old at this point. The dude has to have had some serious health issues. Who's taking care of these health issues? I'm sure somebody's going to recognize him. And that's when we get a doctor named Dr. Don Hinton. And he actually comes out, does all these news broadcasts, does all these interviews. And he's talking about how he's treating a patient whose name is Jesse Garin Presley. And this guy claims that he is in fact Elvis. After going into witness protection, he decided to adopt his brother's name, and his brother's name just happens to be Jesse Presley, his stillborn twin brother. And it was a way for him to continue living on this legacy and continue bringing this, I don't know, maybe these intense feelings of guilt back to the surface and giving his brother the life that he never had almost. Now, there is a young lady named Linda Hood Sigmund who has dedicated an entire YouTube channel to this, and it is very interesting the stuff that she has found out. She has compared this one photo that was given to Dr. Hinton, and this one photo is all he's willing to give out because he doesn't want to blow his cover. But at this point, he's been seeing this doctor for 5 years, and one of the really peculiar things that he mentioned is that he is seeing this doctor for chronic pain. He has chronic arthritis in his back, and so he sees him to get pain medication, essentially, which sounds all too familiar, doesn't it? If we look at this photo at first glance, it does not truly appear to be the same person. But when you really dig in deep into these photos, there are quite a few similarities between these two guys. First of all, they have the two same leg scars on each leg, which is kind of hard to imitate. I mean, the shin is a pretty popular place to bang up, but it's in the exact same spot. They have very much the same mouth crease, and they have very much the same eyes, those piercing blue eyes. They make some of the same mannerisms just in how they like tilt their head and hold themselves. It looks like their hands and their thumbs are extremely similar, and they're a little banged up. He's got man hands. And then his collarbone was broken at some point when he was younger. So it's always had kind of its own unique shape. And you can see that the collarbones between Elvis and Jesse are extraordinarily similar. And then even stranger is that it looks like this young man is his grandson, Ben Storm Presley something else. I can't remember. It's with a K. This would have been his grandson. And this would be the first boy that they've actually had, because up until that point it was all girls. So he was amazingly stoked. And he even wrote a letter to Linda telling her the whole backstory behind all this and how he was super, super stoked to meet his grandson and hang out with him and be able to bring him to his safe space where he's hiding out. Now, Dr. Hinton actually takes a polygraph test, which he passes, and he is able to substantiate all of his claims. And I think the biggest piece for me is that he's really putting his reputation as a doctor on the line, because he is a doctor of psychiatric medicine and he is able to prescribe medication. So for him to go out on a limb like this and say that he's treating Elvis, make these bold claims, people are going to hate all over that. It couldn't be good for his image. So the fact that he's willing to tarnish his image like this gives me some belief that he's telling the truth, or he's extremely convinced of his own beliefs. One way or the other.
Kansas City psychiatrist Dr. Donald Hinton was summoned back to Memphis to meet with attorneys.
A lot of mixed emotions. Mostly, I don't want to be here.
The attorneys represent a woman named Eliza who claims she's Elvis Presley's half-sister. Lab reports suggest that her DNA not only matches the Presley family, but also matches a man who claimed he was Elvis back in 2002. And his DNA matches both sides of the Elvis family tree. The man, who calls himself Jesse after Elvis's deceased twin brother, was Dr. Hinton's patient back in 2002. When we first met Dr. Donald Hinton, he was a successful board-certified psychiatrist and medical doctor. 2 years later, his career is ruined.
It's been very stressful.
We submitted a public information request and got this copy of the Missouri Attorney General's report. But inside the envelope, the documents raise more questions than answers. Take a look at this letter Jesse sent to the Missouri Attorney General. He writes, "Dear Sir, Dr. Hinton was not involved in any conspiracy. These are all good people who, because of their love for me, got caught up in this mess. If I continue to expose myself like I did in the book, I will be eliminated very easily." That letter was reviewed by an international graphologist, Shirley Mason. Her analysis is part of the Attorney General's report.
That handwriting remains constant. It's as exact as a long math problem.
Shirley's analyzed handwriting for 23 years, 10 with the Kansas City, Missouri Bureau of Investigations.
I mean, he mentioned specifically people by name who run this enterprise that they have said to him that, you know, you're never coming out. He has talked about how much money they make every month and how much money they were going to make in August of 2002. And he told me, he said, son, it's all about the money.
He is so convinced that he actually agrees with Jesse to write a book about the true story of Elvis Presley, aka Jesse Presley. Now, there were other things that happened right around when Elvis actually passed away that were kind of fishy. He called up his tour manager and friend, Ellen Foster, and he let her know that he wasn't canceling his tour, but he was canceling his tour. And this would have been the tour that he was expected to be going on in a couple of days, right before he was found unresponsive at Graceland. She was extremely confused, and she kept asking him, like, what do you mean? Why? You're not canceling it, but you're canceling it? And she would only find out a couple days later what he meant. But one of the things he did say was, don't believe anything you hear in the media. It's not true. I will find you later. Also, the day that he passed away, he was spotted using the name John Burrows for his flight ticket to get on a plane at Memphis International Airport. So this sighting leads people to believe that that was him getting the hell out of Dodge before everything broke loose. Then in 1984, this random magazine takes a picture of Muhammad Ali and Jesse Jackson, and in the background you see this random puffy-faced white guy that looks just like Elvis in 1984. We also have recent testimony from a cousin of Elvis and a really close friend, Marty and Billy. They say that they were actually told about this entire plan before Elvis went through with it. He was explaining how this guy Scott was going to be his body. They were going to get plastic surgery so that he looked like Elvis, and basically explained the whole plot to him. And they've come clean recently saying that, yes, this is what he told us, this was our experience, and we've kept it a secret. And then there's this really weird reaction from Lisa Marie Presley. When she's doing this interview, they ask her, what's the communication like with your dad? Do you ever feel like you communicate with him, like kind of talking about it through, you know, from the other side? And she gets super duper uncomfortable and then refuses to answer the question and asks to move on.
Do you ever feel communication with your father? Do you ever feel a channeling? Some people claim that they feel their father or their mother departed around them.
I don't know. We're getting into a hairy, controversial field here, and I'd rather
Yeah,
not
you can
comment.
feel it or feel it.
You know, I mean, if I don't want to answer.
You don't have to. It ain't a court.
Probably make her uncomfortable if she is in active communication with her dad. Which led me right back to Jesse Presley. Because of all the names for Elvis to choose, it honestly makes the most sense, and it's a good way for him to carry on his stillborn brother's legacy, and he wouldn't have to do that much fudging of like ages or dates or whatever. Same birthday, same last name, and he's the only one that seems to have been this enigma, this mystery, all the way up until recently when he had these health problems and he had to see a doctor. And at a certain point, you've kind of got to come clean to your doctor. And if we take a look at these comparisons between Elvis and Jesse's DNA, there is a very, very high similarity between the two of them. And it's concluded that they actually stem from the same family. Now, it can't get it down to an exact science to match them up, but they have been proven to be from the same family lineage. So is this Elvis? The thing that really got me, though, was he sent some letters to Linda, and the handwriting on these letters, identical to Elvis. Identical. Literally identical. And then the fact that he came out with this book with Don Hinton, it makes me really think that Jesse Presley could be our Elvis. The other thing that I found very interesting were not only the phone calls that Jesse or, Elvis makes to Gail Brewer.
People have asked me to do a follow-up, fans' reaction to the possibility of Elvis Presley being alive.
It's great, man. He's dead.
Is he?
He's somewhere right now, you would say.
When does he become alive again?
In a few hours.
He becomes alive again.
I'm just waking up.
Oh, you're just waking up now?
He also makes a phone call to Linda, and they happen to record these phone calls.
Realize, the first 10, 12 years after it all happened, I traveled all over the world. I was never in the same place for very long. The reason being, you get too familiar with people. So I was on the move quite often for about the first 10, 12 years. Then after a while, it became a little easier to not be recognized. But they've gone to great lengths to protect me, to keep me safe, to ensure that I'm not found out.
And Linda actually gets gifts from Elvis on a regular basis. It's kind of weird. And same thing with Don Hinton. He has all these, relics and things from Elvis that he says he could have only gotten from Elvis. And they're currently going through the stages of testing the authenticity of these items, because otherwise he could be charged with fraud. Do you really think this guy would lay it all out on the line like that if he was lying? Plus, he passed a lie detector test. But I found multiple documents throughout this whole investigation that prove that Elvis was in fact working with the FBI. He was working with the DEA, the narcotics agency. He was working to try and bust drugs and restore the American dream. He was fighting this hippie counterculture, and he was doing everything he could to stop essentially MK Ultra. So I don't know, you guys. I was fairly convinced by the end of all this, and I am really interested to read this book. It is called Elvis in His Own Words by Don Hinton and Jesse Presley, and just seems very interesting. I'd be curious to see what it has to say. But I'd also be curious to see what you guys have to say. Do you think that Elvis is still alive? But that's all I got for you guys this week. I really appreciate you sitting, chilling, rocking and rolling with me today. But I look forward to doing this again with you guys next week for another one. But if you just can't get enough sobering stories, I'll leave a playlist at the end. I'll leave my Charlie Kirk video because it's a really great breakdown of all of the interesting inconsistencies. And go show that 9/11 video some love. I guarantee you'll learn something very interesting. I really appreciate you guys. And if you don't subscribe, please subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like. All of that really does help me out. I still feel like I might be shadow banned or something, but we're trying to get out of it, and I could use your help. And I guess I just wanted to leave you guys with simply saying, sleep safe, stay sober. Thank you very much. Later, sobers. Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis may or may not have left the building.
Let's go.
Alcohol.
It's good. It's real good.
It's home cooking soup.
Not hot enough.
No? Well, better let me check. Gee, I'd say perfect. Charlie, what do you say?
Celery and carrots are mighty good.
Well, Stan, how about you?
Chicken's delicious. Noodles, too.
Golly, Fred, looks like you got nothing to complain about.
Gee, guys, thanks for nothing. Don't mention it.
Our pleasure.
The name is home cooking, and so is the taste. From Campbell's.